Today we're going to cover the urinary system models, starting with the urinary tract. So you can see here on this torso model that we have a right and left kidney, and the right kidney is always lower. Remember, we're facing this person, so that's the right kidney and the left kidney. Now the kidneys are going to filter, clean the blood, and then whatever they get out of the blood, we're going to call urine, and that's going to come down these tubes here called the ureters. There's two ureters. And the ureters are going to come all the way down, and they're going to lead to the bladder. And then from the bladder, there's going to be a tube coming out called the urethra. The male is going to go through the penis to exit. Now there's two ureters, two E's in ureters. So that's how you can remember the ureters are between the kidneys and the bladder. Then the urethra, only one E in urethra. It's only one urethra exiting the bladder. Now let's take this off for a minute here so we can see how that bladder looks like from the inside. Here is the bladder. Now notice it has rugae in it. That's so the bladder can expand. And also it has a powerful muscle called the detrusor muscle to force the urine out. And this would be the urethra, a long tube coming out through the penis. Now in the female, let's put the female in here. Same thing, right and left kidney, two ureters, and they're going to lead to the bladder, but this is not the bladder. That is the uterus, because in the females, the uterus sits on top of the bladder. So, in order to see the bladder, I'm going to have to take this apart now. And here we can see it from the side view. Here. This was up there like this. We took it out, and that's what we were seeing, the uterus. Here's the bladder. Looks the same as in the male. Rugae and the detrusor muscle. You can see the ureter coming down here. And it's going to enter the bladder below the uterus here. And here's your urethra, shorter. All right. Now let's go over to the other models. We have a urinary system model over here waiting for you. Now this is looking from the back side. I hope you did notice that the kidneys are sitting in the back posterior part of the body. So from the back side, we can see the kidneys. Looking from the back, so this is the right, because remember the right's lower. Left kidney. There's your two ureters leading down to the bladder. You can't see the urethra yet, but let's turn this bladder around. Here you can see the pubic bone part of the pelvic bone protecting the bladder. And now if we can take this part of the bladder off. Okay. Now let's look at the inside of the bladder. See the rugae, the detrusor muscle, and here is the urethra coming out here. Of course, in the female it would be short, but in the male it would be longer because it would come out through the penis. Now this little area I want to point out, this triangular area here, is called the trigone area. And basically what it does is it connects the two ureter openings as they enter the bladder with the urethra opening. And if we connect the three dots, we get a triangle. It's called the trigone area. And you can see that in the real bladder. It's a little bit different consistency and color of tissue. Now let's look closer at the kidney. We have a bunch of models of the kidney. I'll show you all of them. First of all, the kidney has a capsule on it, a dark brown. And there's two major areas of the kidney, the cortex and the medulla. The cortex is the outer core Goes from the capsule to here. Now where you start to see these triangular pyramids, they're going to be called, that starts the medulla, or middle of the kidney. So cortex to the pyramids, and then from the pyramids on in is the medulla. The cortex is going to be the filtering part of the kidney, the area that cleans the blood. And the medulla is going to be the collection part of the kidney that's going to collect the urine waste products filtered out of the blood. So what can we see here as far as structures? Okay, so cortex we're not going to see too much right now. We're going to have to zoom in on that here shortly. In the medulla, we do have these pyramids. Now they look like pyramids, don't they? There's the base and there's the tip. So these lines on the pyramids, you can call them renal pyramids, medullary pyramids. The lines are collecting tubes, collecting the urine that was filtered out in the cortex. So then they all end in this tip that protrudes into this bigger tube. Now this protrusion, we've learned that term before, is called a papilla, a renal papilla. It sticks out into this tube. And this tube here is called the minor calyx. Minor calyx. If we have a minor calyx, we have to have a major calyx. So sure enough, these minor calyxes here join to form a major calyx. Now this here, we see the renal pyramid with the collecting tubules, and we see the renal papilla, and we see a minor calyx. We can just barely see a papilla from another pyramid coming in here, because remember this is a three-dimensional kidney, so it's coming in from this way. Here's another papilla, minor calyx, minor calyx. Here's a renal pyramid. Papilla would protrude into the minor calyx here. And then when all these calyxes, the major calyx there and the major one here, join, we get what's called the pelvis, or pelvic region of the kidney. And you're thinking pelvis means hip. It does mean hip, but it also means that collection part of the kidney, because the Latin word pelvis means a basin or bowl. And this looks like a bowl that's collecting the urine. In the pelvic region of the body, you know, the pelvic region dips down between the pelvic bones, so we call it the pelvic cavity, because it's like a bowl, and that's where the bladder was, if you remember. Remember over there? That whole area dipped down there was the pelvic region, the pelvic bowl, where the bladder and reproductive organs sit. Okay. Now what else we can see here is a nice blood supply. Oh, don't let me forget. The pelvic region then leads to the ureter, and the ureter will go on down to the bladder. Now, the blood supply here, we have a renal artery bringing blood in, and a renal vein bringing blood out. Now, this dipped-in region of the kidney here, we had that in the lymph node too. Any dipped-in region we can call the hilum or hilus part of the kidney, and that's usually where vessels enter and exit. You can see on this kidney here. This would be the hilum or hilus, the dip, where the ureter and blood vessels enter and exit. So that would be that area. Now, as we bring this renal artery in, it's going to split, because we got to get blood to all parts of the kidney so it can start filtering it. So the first little break here, where the renal artery splits, they're called segmental arteries, because they're going to go to different segments of the kidney. Now, once these segmental arteries start going between the pyramids here and here, they call them interlobar arteries. And the reason for that is the pyramids are kind of like lobes, round structures. So they call them between lobar arteries. Now, once we get in between the pyramids, this artery curves and arcs over the pyramids. So naturally, they gave that artery the name arcuate artery, because it arcs over the pyramids. And then these branches coming up into the cortex, they call the cortical radiate arteries because they're radiating or branching into the cortex. Now, the cortical radiates are going to end up going to the filtering devices of the kidney, which are microscopic, and they're going to be called nephrons. And we can't see them here in the cortex because they're microscopic, but we're going to have models of those. Let's look at another model. All right, here's another one, a little bit different color. Let's follow the arteries while we get that on our mind. Renal artery, segmental artery, interlobar artery, arcuate artery, cortical radiate artery. Now they're starting to show some parts of the nephrons here. And we're going to, off the cortical radiate, we're going to have some little tiny arterioles called afferent arterioles, which are going to lead to the nephrons. When they get that small, we call them arterioles. Afferent is going to go into the nephron. What else do we see here? Well, the veins, of course, are going to do the opposite. We have the cortical radiate vein, arcuate vein, interlobar vein, segmental vein, renal vein. And the blood leaving is going to be nice and clean. We have the cortex here, and we're going to have some nephrons in it. Medulla is going to actually start about right here. Medulla, it's harder to see the pyramids here. You can see a nice one here. So here we can definitely see a nice cortex, and that's where the medulla would start with these renal pyramids here, with those lines being the collecting tubules. Like I said, these are part of the nephrons here, but we have to zoom in even closer to see the filtering nephrons better. From the pyramids, we're going to enter the minor calyx. Here's another pyramid, minor calyx, major calyx, and then enter the pelvic region of the kidney, where it funnels the waste product down into the ureter. This is a not too detailed version of another kidney model. The reason I put this on here, if you remember the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidney? Remember that, one of the endocrine glands? Well, this is the only model that shows that the adrenal gland is actually two glands in one, two endocrine glands in one. We have the adrenal cortex on the outside, which secretes different hormones than the adrenal medulla on the inside. So, we still have a cortex and medulla in the adrenal gland, just like we have a cortex and a medulla in the kidney. So here, you can easily see the cortex, and then the medulla would start with these renal pyramids. We can see a little renal papilla, minor calyx, major calyxes. Here's a minor calyx. And coming down into this pelvic region and then the ureter. This is kind of a size of a real kidney. So it's kind of smaller than my fist. A little bit elongated for me, but I would say about right here. And even on this, you can see the cortex and medulla, but it's not too clear. I just wanted you to get an idea for the size of the kidney. And then we get this model. Now I'm going to flip this up a little bit, because now what we're starting to get into here, this is called a tri-model. They show three things about the kidney on one model. Okay, starting with the kidney, and then they're going to take and zoom in on the nephrons in the cortex. So they're going to take a slice like right here, and that's going to become this. So now we can start to see the nephrons. Okay, I basically took one pyramid here and part of that cortex. This third model, they're going to take one of these, it's going to be called Bowman's capsule, and they're going to zoom in on that. So we have to learn some structures on each one of those. Excuse me a minute, I'm going to put a box up here to get this into the light. I'm going to make some noise. Okay, now we're going to rest this up here. There you go. Hopefully that doesn't fall. All right, so the kidney model, again, this is actually my favorite one. It shows more details. Let's follow the blood and the filtering and come back out. Renal artery, segmental artery, interlobar artery between the pyramids, arcuate artery, arcing over the pyramid, cortical radiate artery, this tiny little afferent arteriole entering the beginning of the nephron, which is that little 12 area. So all of these circular structures are part of the nephron, the beginning of the nephron. And it's called Bowman's capsule. And you can see them there. But again, we're going to have to zoom in on that over here in a minute. So once the blood is filtered and cleaned by those nephrons, which we can't see many parts of it yet, it's going to come out here. Cortical radiate vein, arcuate vein, interlobar vein, segmental vein, renal vein. In the meantime, what we filtered out, the urine, we're going to send down these lines here, which are the collecting tubules of the pyramid, of the renal pyramid. And from there, you can see this renal pyramid has a papilla that feeds into the minor calyx. This pyramid, you can see some of the collecting tubules there. They made one in white so you could see it. They enlarged it, bringing urine down into its papilla into the minor calyx. The minor calyx is joined to the major calyx, and then we have this pelvic region and the ureter. One other part of the cortex I want to mention, the filtering cortex, from here to here. Sometimes that cortex will dip in between the pyramids. And that's, you can see it's the same type of tissue. That's called a renal column because it's a column between the pyramids. Here's another part right there. Now, a good landmark, besides the pyramids, to distinguish between the cortex and the medulla, is that arcuate artery. You can see that's the dividing line between the medulla, the pyramids, and the cortex here. And that's going to become important on this other model here, so we can get our perspective. This is the arcuate artery. So therefore, this is the cortex. And back down here is the medulla, particularly the medulla pyramid there. This would be the blood vessel going between the pyramids, so that would be the interlobular artery. These arteries would radiate up into the cortex, so they would be the cortical radiate arteries. This little branch, and there, going into the nephrons, the Bowman capsule part, would be the afferent arterioles. Here is a collecting duct, enlarged in white. Now let's look at the part of the nephrons here. There's going to be 5 parts of each nephron. So learn those on diagrams also. But here we have the first part is this ball of capillaries here inside this capsular structure. Now, Arnie said this is Bowman's capsule. Well, if you take the top off of Bowman's capsule, there's a ball of capillaries in here called the glomerulus. Glomerulus, it means a ball, and in this case, a ball of capillaries. So that's where the blood first enters this nephron to be filtered, in the glomerulus. From there, the filtering is going to continue down into this Bowman's capsule, which is a capsule surrounding the glomerulus. Later on, we'll see that if we want to talk about the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule together, sometimes it'll be called the renal corpuscle. But let's get back to the 5 parts of nephron. First part, glomerulus, ball of capillaries. Second part, Bowman's capsule. Then we're going to have this long winding tube here called the proximal convoluted tubule. Now it's called proximal because remember, proximal means close to. So this twisted tubule, which is where we get the convoluted term from, convoluted means twisted, is close to Bowman's capsule. So we call it the proximal convoluted tubule. Then we get this long loop of Henle, after a guy named Henle that discovered it. Long loop of Henle. It's the 4th part. And in the 5th part, we get the distal convoluted tubule here. Now it's called distal because it's distant from its attachment to Bowman's capsule, and it's convoluted twisted. That's the 5 parts of nephron. Then we feed into this long collecting tubule. So, as blood comes in to the nephron, 5 parts. Glomerulus, ball of capillaries does the bulk filtering into Bowman's capsule. From Bowman's capsule, we have the proximal convoluted tubule, often abbreviated PCT, and that's where we reabsorb some good stuff into the blood, because blood's going to be wrapped all around this. Loop of Henle is going to be mainly to regulate water content of your body and urine. And then the distal convoluted tubule, distant from Bowman's capsule, but still twisted, DCT, is going to be your last chance to secrete anything from the blood that's bad out into the urine. Maybe you missed it here. So you can see there's blood vessels there. Matter of fact, this nephron, as you're going to see, particularly in later pictures here, has these capillaries wrapped all around it. They show some of them here, but they're wrapped all around this nephron. They're called peritubular capillaries. Peri means around. Tubular is the tubules of the nephron. Here's another nephron. Let's look at this one. Arcuate artery, cortical radiate artery, afferent arteriole. Now we start with the 5 parts of nephron. Glomerulus, ball of capillaries, Bowman's capsule. PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. Loop of Henle. Distal convoluted tubule, DCT, that's the end of the nephron, and then collecting duct. Now the loop of Henle does have a descending limb, they call it, and an ascending limb. And you can't tell which is which unless you follow the filtering. So like on this side, glomerulus, Bowman's capsule, PCT, this is the descending limb, and that's the ascending limb going up to the DCT. On this side, I can't just look at it and say which is which. I have to follow the filtering. Glomerulus, Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule. Now this is the descending limb, ascending limb, DCT, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. This is the renal pyramid and papilla. Any blood vessels you see wrapped all around are the peritubular capillaries. Now this little vessel actually leading out of Bowman's capsule is the efferent arteriole. Remember, we had afferent coming in to start the filtering. Once we finish the filtering, we have the efferent coming out, and these are the peritubular capillaries. Now the third part of this model, because remember we went from this, with these Bowman's capsules, the cortex, to zooming in on the entire nephron, not just the Bowman's capsules. Now we're going to take one of these Bowman's capsules with the glomerulus inside. Remember, we called it the renal corpuscle together. We're going to take that and zoom in here, because there's some important structures here that we're going to talk about in the physiology lecture. So here we can easily see the glomerulus, ball of capillaries, and we can see Bowman's capsule. Now there's special filtering cells on top of the glomerulus indicated here, and those are called podocytes. Podocytes. And you can see them here. Here's one here that has all these extensions that look like feet, and that's actually where the podocyte cell got its name. Podo, feet. Cells, sites with feet. And the blood gets filtered between those out into Bowman's capsule. Here you can see the nucleus part of one. So the glomerulus is covered by podocytes, filtering cells. Now this is the beginning of the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. These little arterioles coming in here, well, this is going to be the afferent arteriole coming in to Bowman's capsule, and this is going to be the efferent leaving. How do I know? Well, the afferent coming in has a higher blood pressure because it's closer to the heart. And after the filtering, we have a little bit lower blood pressure, so the arteriole can be a little bit smaller. This little tube here is actually the distal convoluted tubule. It's not connected to it, it just comes up beside it. So here, if you notice, this nephron, Bowman's capsule glomerulus leads to the PCT, loop of Henle, but the DCT doesn't connect to it, but it comes up close to it here. And that's what that's showing there. And you're going to learn also in physiology, there's some special cells here and here that are going to give feedback on how the filtering's going. These are going to be the granular cells of the afferent arteriole is going to give feedback on if we have the right blood pressure coming in. It should be 10 millimeters of mercury, and it needs to be that exact amount to do the proper filtering. So that's going to give some feedback to keep that pressure right. And then this area, the macula densa, is going to give some feedback as to, do we have the right amount of sodium and water in this urine? And these can release hormones and other feedback mechanisms to tweak the filtering to make sure it's going well. And then we have this last model here. This is kind of a block model. It's pretty cool. It shows the nephrons. It's going to zoom in on the nephron and Bowman's capsule here. And there's the kidney. So let's start here. That's the kidney. You should recognize a lot of structures there. And then we go from there, we're going to go to the nephron. Now, since this nephron is a little bit different, I will go over it here. Right away, I see my arcuate artery and vein. So I know this is the cortex, this is the medulla. In the medulla, I see the collecting tubules in the pyramid. Now up in the cortex, I see the cortical radiate artery. I see the afferent arteriole going into Bowman's capsule with the glomerulus inside of it. Now in this nephron they show here, I wish they showed the glomerulus here, but that's Bowman's capsule, the glomerulus is inside. This would be the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule, until it goes to the loop of Henle, descending loop of Henle, ascending limb, loop of Henle. Now we got the DCT, distal convoluted tubule, going around until you get the collecting duct. Bowman's capsule, PCT, descending limb, loop of Henle, ascending limb, loop of Henle, DCT, collecting tubule. Now here, this is a nice one because this shows all those peritubular capillaries that are wrapped around the entire nephron. They didn't show many of them on here, but this is the way it is in the body. Now remember, all these nephrons are microscopic. You can't see them unless you have a microscope. So here, arcuate artery, cortical radiate artery, afferent arteriole coming in. Now Bowman's capsule, bulk filtering. Now the proximal convoluted tubule here in yellow, very long in this case. Proximal next to Bowman's capsule, convoluted twisted, but see all the peritubular capillaries around it? Because what happened at the bulk filtering is we didn't do a perfect job there. So during the PCT movement of the filtrate, whatever enters into the nephron is called a filtrate, sometimes we put too many good things out of the blood and we have to get them back. So a lot of reabsorption occurs right away in this PCT. Get some good stuff back in the blood. When you go down the loop of Henle, we continue to have peritubular capillaries. This part, sometimes they call the vasa recta because it looks like a ladder, vessels, straight vessels, but you can just call those peritubular capillaries too. Here we're perfecting the amount of water in the body and in the urine. And then the DCT, distal convoluted tubule, you can see is distant from Bowman's capsule. That's long and twisted too. Here, you can see we're going to lead to the collecting tubule. But here, maybe there's some bad stuff we didn't get out of the blood here. So now the blood, since it's still wrapped around that, it's our last chance to get some bad stuff out of the blood into the DCT to get into the urine to get rid of. Long collecting tubule here. And here, since this was the afferent arteriole coming in, this is the efferent coming out and leading and branching to all those peritubular capillaries there. Then they're going to zoom in on the Bowman's capsule part. Well, it looks like they have the whole part here. They haven't zoomed in on Bowman's capsule yet. Here, they do show all parts of the nephron. Glomerulus, Bowman's capsule, 2. Proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and I don't see the collecting duct there. Now they finally zoom in to Bowman's capsule here, and we've been over that, but I'll do it real quick. Glomerulus, ball of capillaries. Here the podocytes look a little different, but they still have their extension feet on them. Bowman's capsule. Here's the proximal convoluted tubule coming off. Remember I said this is the afferent arteriole coming in because it's a little thicker than the efferent arteriole coming out. Granular cells regulating blood pressure. Here is the distal convoluted tubule coming up right beside Bowman's capsule, but not connected to it. And this is the macula densa area there, giving feedback about sodium and water and other ingredients. This efferent arteriole will lead to all those peritubular capillaries. Let's look at this one more time here. Just so you get the idea, again, that this PCT is connected to Bowman's capsule, but the DCT comes close to it, but not connected to it, to give feedback. And don't forget, every nephron is wrapped extensively by these peritubular capillaries around all parts of it. It's a lot of renal models, wasn't it?